Oh, all right. Well, it's 5 after, and I imagine there are going to be a few more people sliding in. Kathleen, you look like you're looking for something on your keyboard. Well, it's always a joy to see who shows up to this particular circle as we continue on month to month. Just to let you know, we will likely be doing another cohort of Last Acts of Kindness in September, October, and we'll let people know about that. I'm going to start my usual with a poem, and since Ladybird cannot be here tonight, she's in another healing circle tonight with people from Los Angeles. But we have a very special guest tonight, Judy Long, who will be doing a lot of grounding exercises with us. So we will do those in a little bit. So this is a poem by Rilke called The Swan. Is translated by Robert Bly. This clumsy living that moves, lumbering as if in ropes through what is not done, reminds us of the awkward way the swan walks. And to die, which is the letting go of the ground we stand on and cling to every day, is like the swan when he or she nervously lets himself down into the water, which receives him gaily and which flows joyfully under and after him, wave after wave, while the swan, unmoving and marvelously calm, is pleased to be carried, each moment more fully grown, more like a king, further and further on.
Would you read it again, Redwing?
Sure.
Thank you.
The swan. Just picture any time you have seen a swan in or out of the water. This clumsy living that moves lumbering as if in ropes through what is not done reminds us of the awkward way the swan walks. And to die, which is the letting go of the ground we stand on and cling to every day, is like the swan when he nervously lets himself down into the water, which receives him gaily and which flows joyfully under and after him, wave after wave, while the swan, unmoving and marvelously calm, is pleased to be carried, each moment more fully grown, more like a king, further and further on. And I also want to just remind us of the brief version of the Healing Circle agreements as we come together again, respecting each other, listening generously, speaking kindly from our hearts, refraining from the urge to fix, trusting our inner guidance, holding confidentiality, and relying on the power of silence. I guess my words are gratitude for having gotten out of the fog and wind for a couple of days now that I'm back in it, especially. And also just want to say I appreciate, Joanne and Dan bringing up the Day of Remembrance, because I often hesitate to invite people whose losses were long ago, thinking, oh, they wouldn't necessarily want to still be here on a day. But what you've said makes me realize, oh, it can be a really important ritual for everyone, no matter how long it's been since one's losses. So thank you for helping me see that. So Judy, I think you'll probably do a better job at introducing yourself. I'll just say Judy is part of our team at the Mary Center as a chaplain, but she's part of many teams at UCSF as a chaplain, and a teacher. And I know someone, I'm not sure if it's someone who was, if the person who mentioned Judy at the last meeting last month, who had just like heard about, oh, Judy Long, oh, Judy Long, oh, Judy Long. And when I said, Judy Long's going to be here to present, they were like, oh, wow. And I'm not sure who that was. But so, Judy, your reputation definitely precedes you in many circles. And just, it's great to have you here to talk with this particular group because yeah, you understand the topics that they've come together around with caregiving and compassion and end of life and during life. So just welcome. Oh, but you're still muted.
So, they have a game they play as an icebreaker with little kids. I used to see that when I was, maybe they do it with adults too. And the game goes like this. If you really knew me, you would know X. So if you really knew me, you would know I always start talking and forget to unmute myself. So thank you very much. But really happy to be here with you. And Red Wing, thank you so much for the intro. You may have oversold me. That's okay. I'll just dive in. So, I am a palliative care chaplain and educator at UCSF, so I do work with the Mary Center. That's my honor and my pleasure. And I offer sustainable caregiving courses through the Mary Center now. I used to offer it also through a neuropalliative clinic, but the study that was part of is no longer present. So now I offer it all through the Mary Center, which is great. Very fortunate to be able to continue that. And I work with SMS, the Symptom Management Service, as a chaplain. And so those of you that have been involved with the Symptom Management Service will be familiar with that. What is it? Palliative care for patients who have advanced cancers, who are outpatients still. So that's my other world, or my same world. So very happy to be here tonight. Thank you for welcoming me to talk with you. And when Red Wing and I were considering what would really serve, what would be helpful, it was finding some way to find balance right in the middle of caregiving, which can be a mixed blessing and not always easy by any means. And Red Wing and I both agreed that a really great way of doing that is the GRACE model, which some of you I know are quite familiar with. I know Anthea, you are. I know Wendy, unless you missed that class, you are, because you did my caregivers class. And some of you may be very familiar with it on your own that I don't know about. So clearly this will be a very abbreviated version. I would like to say still a meaningful one. I hope so for you. But we'll be doing in just a very short time an introduction to what the different parts of the GRACE model are, so you can see if this is something that interests you. And then I'm happy to point you as well to where you can get more or go to a weekend-long workshop for it, if you like, in Santa Fe or now online, which is quite wonderful. So on that note, I'm going to dive in, but before I do, does anyone have any comments or questions just about any of this as a place to start? Okay. Well, in that case, I'd like to start with a practice, a very simple practice. And you do many of these practices, I'm told, yourselves at the beginning of your sessions together. I find I always like to give people an opportunity to settle the mind and body before we start a class or whatever. And I will typically share a type of a grounding practice. There are many ways of quieting the mind. I'm going to show you one that you may have done before. We'll do it again, but this is one that I often use in the beginning of grace. So while you're on the one hand doing a grounding practice, on the other hand, you're learning one of the steps of grace just as we begin. So let me walk you through it first, and then we can talk a little about it, or I can. And I promise to try to watch my clock. And please, Red Wing, don't hesitate to say, you're running out of time if I'm blowing it, okay? I often do that. So, and I would normally ask Gail to do that because she's great at it, but I want Gail to get her rest, Gail. So that would be great. All right. So if you would, please, if you would sway around in your chair a little bit, just so you can notice the sensation of your sit bones beneath you, or the sensation of the chair supporting your sit bones. Yeah. We'll come back to that, but that's going to be part of this practice. I'd like you to combine it with a breath. So only if you're comfortable with the breath. If you're not, I'd like you to skip the breath part. But if the breath is okay for you to notice, then on the next in-breath, could you please breathe in through your nostrils? And while you're breathing in, I'd like you to see if you can notice another physical sensation. See if you can notice the sensation of the air entering your nostrils. So you may have already done it. I'm going to say it again and ask you to do it again. On the next in-breath, breathe in. Notice the sensation of the air as it enters your nostrils. Go ahead. Okay. And if you were easily able to notice that, great. If you couldn't, then you might want to breathe even a little more strongly. Again, what I'm asking you to notice is notice the sensation of the air as it enters your nostrils. So do it one more time, please. In breath, go. And then during the out breath, just let the breath take care of itself. And instead, drop your attention into your body and bring your attention to noticing the sensation of the support of the bottom of the chair beneath your sit bones. And let your attention rest there for a moment. And we'll do all of it again. It has two parts, notice. So on the in-breath, breathe in. Notice the sensation of the air entering your nostrils on the in-breath. And during the out-breath, allow your attention to drop into your body. Notice the sensation of the support of the bottom of the chair. Just that. And while you're sitting here quietly, you're welcome to open your eyes, but I'd like you to just notice how you feel now. Did that feel comfortable to try? Could you notice the sensations that we talked about? And I'm seeing a few people nodding. I hope you could. I'd like to just share a few things about that practice that it's really quite lovely. One of them is when we're breathing in and noticing the sensation of the air entering your nostrils, our nostrils, that's what we're doing. That's what we're paying attention to. If there were other things on our mind, if we were worried about something at home, if we're worried about someone we're caring for, that's still there. But for just a moment, we've cleared away all of those other thoughts and distractions, and we're busy noticing the sensation of the air entering our nostrils. Could you raise your hand, those of you I can see, if you ever multitask? Is there anyone in here that's ever multitasked? Is it? Okay, ha ha ha, right? It's a good joke. And Ben, welcome, glad you're here. So we're diving right in, Ben. I'm Judy, and we're going over the grace model. So thank you for joining us. So the...
Lost your sound.
Really?
Back. Okay.
It could be that I put my arm around the cord where the microphone was, something like that. So thank you. So I was asking if anyone here had ever multitasked, and I was getting a lot of nods. Yes. So I'm the same. I always feel like I'm a champion multitasker. I do it all the time, like it or not. I'm stuck doing it, and I do it. So my neuroscientist friends say to me, Judy, you don't multitask. And of course, you can imagine what I say to them. I say, oh, yes, I do. You're wrong. I multitask all the time. They said, no, you don't. You just think you multitask, because actually your brain can only go to one thing at a time. And when we multitask, it feels like we're doing many things at once, but really our brain is, and they didn't use these words, but it's what I imagine. It's like the brain is like a little machine gun going rat-a-tat-tat-tat-tat, going back and forth between all the different things that we're attending to. They say that's why multitasking is so tiring. Feels like we're doing them all at once, but we're really like looking at this, looking at that, looking at that, looking at that. So why am I saying that? When you're breathing in and noticing the sensation of the air entering your nostrils, that's all your brain is doing for just a moment. You've stopped thinking about all the other stuff. You've cleared, it's like clearing away or opening a set of curtains. You've cleared away the distractions. And for just a second, you can think more clearly. Personally, I think it'd be worth it for that alone. Anything that'll help me think more clearly, I think is a good thing. And then when you drop into your body and you notice the sensation of the support of the chair beneath you, and it works just as well if you were standing up with the soles of your feet. Actually, you can do it sitting down with the soles of your feet, but when your weight is above your body, you feel it a little more. But try it right now. If you could, if your legs are crossed, perhaps uncross them and press the soles of your feet a little bit towards the floor. And see if you can notice the sensation of the support of the floor beneath your feet. Could you nod if you can notice that? Are you able to notice that sensation? Okay. Pretend that you're walking in place, or walk in place, if you will, while you're sitting. And as one foot goes down, notice the sensation of the support of the floor beneath your heel, then beneath the ball of your foot, then switch to the other foot, beneath your heel, beneath the ball of your foot. Was that possible to do? So it'd be possible to do this when you're walking as well, yes? A friend of mine who is an oncologist and a palliative care doc in Seattle at the University of Washington, he does this all the time when he walks between patients' rooms. Clears his mind with a breath, and then he walks and notices the support of the floor. Isn't that nice? And by the way, you may wonder, what's so magical about the support of the chair or the floor? And the reason that that's been found to be useful, it's been studied to be useful, is that when we notice the support, we are actually giving our brain a signal that we're secure and safe. So if I'm stressed and my brain is feeding lots of adrenaline into my system, which it's a good thing, it's doing that to keep me safe, right? But maybe I don't need all that adrenaline right now and I'd like it to kind of cool down. If I just say to myself, well, Judy's amygdala, would you please calm down? I find that it doesn't really get my words. I can't use my words with my own brain. Isn't that crazy? Not with that part of my brain. But what my brain does get is how I feel in my body, right? No words. If I'm noticing the sensation of the support of the chair or the support of the floor, then the amygdala, that part of the brain that responds to threats, gets a message that it can calm down. Isn't that nice? So you could use that alone without anything else that we're going to talk about this evening, anytime you like. I would suggest this, if you find that's maybe a little bit interesting to you, try it out when you're not stressed, so you get used to what it feels like, so you don't have to think about it. And then when you feel a little stressed, all you need to do is you need to notice if you're stressed. If you don't notice it, nothing happens, right? You need to notice it. And then you drop into your body and feel the sensation. And then one more aside about that is that if you are already flooded with adrenaline and you do this grounding practice, the adrenaline does not evaporate. Darn, I wish it would, but it doesn't. It's still there in our bodies. So it's helpful cognitively just to be aware of that, to go, oh, I better give myself a little bit of time to calm down now. I've done a grounding practice, great. Let me turn my mind to something that is not stressful. So I'm not encouraging my brain to flood me with even more adrenaline. So I'm going to try not to go back to worrying about the same thing that triggered me to begin with. And that's something I don't usually say to people. I don't usually say, oh, let's avoid or distract ourselves from what's on our minds. I think it's generally good to look straight at something. But in this case, my goal is to calm down my amygdala. So what I want to do is not be looking straight at what's going to get me more triggered. I want to have something else to look at for a little while, just while the adrenaline dissipates. And then I can give it some thought while my mind is clearer. And for that purpose, and this is, I'm giving you a little bit of extra credit here aside from grace. What I'd like you to do is to consider what works for me, for each of you, because I know it'll be different for each one of us. So for me, for example, it might work for me to think of the ocean. That makes me happy, it makes me calm, it reminds me of childhood memories. It might work for me to think of my father who died when I was a child, but he was my favorite dad and I love him. When I think of him, I feel good. You know, it can be thinking of one of your pets or one of your kids or a favorite poem or an inspiring writing. But it's nice to have something like that in your back pocket, because my experience has been that when I'm the most stressed, it's not when I can think of the things that bring me peace and calm. So it's helpful to think in advance, these things work for me, and then I can turn my mind to them when I want. So we've just spent a lot of time on this one opening to grace. Let me tell you for a moment where the grace model came from and what it was for, and then we'll go ahead with the other steps. So for those of you that are not already familiar with the grace model, this was developed by Joan Halifax, if you know her name. She is by profession a medical anthropologist, and by life profession, she's worked with people at end of life for pretty much her entire career. She did take 6 years out, during which she worked with patients, or rather with prisoners on death row. So I would say that's still working with people at end of life. But that's been her work. And Wendy, yes, that's okay. Thank you. Glad you're here as much as you can be. What she found is that when she worked with clinicians who also worked with people that were at end of life, they had no particular training in how to balance themselves in the middle of being present with suffering. So they would become distressed, or they would become upset, or they would try to protect themselves by kind of turning off their feelings so they didn't get too pulled in. And they just didn't have a way of finding balance in the middle of stuff. So that was something she'd noticed throughout her experience. And then over the last 20 years, maybe 25, a lot of research has unfolded about compassion, empathy, positive emotions, neuroscience. And as these different areas have expanded, they all seem to point in somewhat similar directions if you are focused on this sort of thing. And Joan Halifax was. And she was honored with a fellowship, I guess it was called, or scholarship, something of that sort, visiting scholar. She was invited to be a visiting scholar at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. for 6 months, during which she could come in and sit in one of their offices and do anything she wanted. That was the whole thing. What an amazing kind of a gift, like a writer's residency where you don't have to tell them what you're going to write. So same sort of thing. So she got her 6 months there. And what she was interested in was, let me think about compassion. How does that work? And in her tradition, which is Zen Buddhist, she said, well, we've all got compassion. That's sort of, we're given that by birth. It's a birthright. It's part of us. We have compassion, but some people can access it more easily than the others. She thought, what's it made up of? And that's what she was really exploring. And I won't go through her whole process, but as she thought about it more and more and married it with the current research, she came up with these different elements that are elements that go into the making up of compassion. She said, well, we can't really train someone to become compassionate. Everyone's is compassionate. That was her belief. She said, but we can train these different elements that make up compassion. So I'm going to look at that. And the grace model really comes from that. So the elements that are trainable, that can strengthen our capacity to be compassionate, are the ones that are included in grace. And if I were to name them, which I could do very briefly, and I will do that now, is there's the G of grace, and you might think it stands for grounding. Actually, it doesn't. It stands for gathering our attention. And it is about developing or cultivating attentional balance. so that we're not totally distracted and off daydreaming about Tahiti when we're in here. So what is it that allows us to cultivate attentional balance? And she married into that some of the grounding practice with it, which is enormously useful. The R of Grace, and I'm just going to cite them quickly now, and then we'll come back to each of the others. You've just done the G. So the R of Grace is, this is a loose acronym. Let me say, by the way, this was not Joan Halifax's acronym. She came up with the elements that she thought were trainable. And one of the young people that works with her said, oh, you could call that grace, but it's a little bit of a stretch. So the R of Grace is recall your intention. The A of Grace has to do with attunement, attuning ourselves to ourselves and then to another person. So it's the relational aspect of grace. And please know, I'll explain each of these in more detail. I just want to say them for you first so you hear that. The C of Grace is consider what will serve. And the E of Grace has two E's. One of the E's is engage in whatever it is you've thought it's skillful to do. And then end. How do you end a visit? Yes, that's a good way to put it. A visit, a conversation, anything. Okay. So that's what GRACE stands for. So let's back up a little bit. The G of Grace is gathering your attention. Let's say you're about to walk into a room and care for the person you're caring for. And you thought, well, it might be handy if I sort of got my feet on the ground so that I'm a little bit grounded before I walk in there instead of just feeling like, oh my God, I just did all these 5 things and I'm rushed. How about if I just ground myself first, just for a second? Is there some way I can do that quickly and simply? So I want to bring you back and remind you that Joan Halifax developed this for clinicians who worked with people at end of life. And she found the clinicians were so busy with all of the details of the things that they did all the time that they rarely took time out to do any of these kinds of things. So she was trying to find a way to enable them to do these things without needing any extra time, right while they were in the middle of work. Does that sound like it's anything that might be familiar to any of us as caregivers? Might this be something that would be useful to us right in the middle of life? Can I ground myself even while I'm in the middle of going about my business? So of the 5 practices, they're all designed to be done while working or giving care. I say giving care, it's still working, right? It's the work of the heart, which is still caregiving, as is the work of the professionals. Yeah. Let me pause for a second. Are there comments or questions now? And please know you're always welcome to speak out and ask me any that you want. I just want to make sure I'm not running off like a wild horse. And you're going, what are you talking about? Yeah. Any thoughts or questions? Comments?
Judy, I'll just note that in my various training of volunteers around palliative care, especially when I was at JFCS, training people to go to people's homes who were seriously ill, that one of the images we used was that, after grounding yourself in your car or on the public transportation that you were taking, to imagine really as you entered either the room or the home, that there's a basket at the door. And you empty all of your previous stuff that you have had with you for the day into that basket. And if you need it when you leave, you can take it back. But you deposit all your extraneous energy and things that you don't need in the basket at the door as you go in.
Thank you, Red Wing. That's a great image. Yeah. And is that something you guys have practiced in your last acts of kindness when you've done that? I've heard that before. It's very nice.
Yeah. I don't know that we did it in this course, but.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to think where I've come across that before, but it's a nice one. Thank you. So let's come back to the grounding. Let's say you're ready to walk into the room, and basket or no basket, just take a breath and do just as we did just a moment ago. Take a breath in, and there are other ways you can do it. You don't have to notice the support of the chair or the floor. It can be anything that stabilizes you. It might be squeezing a wrist or holding your arms, anything that you like. But I like the ones that I just shared with you. They're often used in trauma resilience practices where somebody can just shift their attention and then quiet down the part of the brain that responds to threats. So the G of Grace, let's say you're about to walk in, and I'll share with you something that some of my ICU nurses came up with. Actually, not, I say mine, but they were not at UCSF. This was down at Stanford where I was teaching some of this. And I was teaching them the grounding practice. And one of the nurses immediately said, well, Judy, what do I do if I ground myself and then I walk into the ICU cubicle and everyone's yelling at me? Maybe there's a whole family in there that's angry with me and they're yelling at me. What do I do? Right? So it's a good question. It's fair. You think that's ever happened? Of course. And the other nurses that were standing there, they answered it. I didn't have to say a word. They just looked at her. They said, what? You just do it again. Nobody knows you're doing it. And it was the best possible answer. Grounding doesn't have to happen before you walk into a room. It can happen anytime. It can happen whenever you notice it would be useful. So I really want to encourage you to remember that and just use it off and on. You will undoubtedly be taken by surprise by things that occur, like the family yelling at the nurse, perhaps, if they walked in the room. So something happens that surprises you. You want to take a breath, drop into your body, notice the support of the floor. Why not? Right? You can do that. Okay, so that's the G of Grace. And then the R of Grace has to do with recalling our intention. Now, that's an interesting one, right? So what kind of intentions might we have? My intention is, and I'm going to invite all of you in a moment to think of something, but I'm going to ask you to think of intention in a particular way. So a little bit beyond or different than the things that you might still need to do. So different than an intention to get somebody ready for their doctor's appointment, an intention to get somebody showered or bathed, an intention to bring somebody food, an intention to let someone know you love them. That's nice. An intention to whatever it might be. But in this particular case, the recall your intention, it is for a particular reason that's part of grace. This is recalling your intention. That is, why am I really here? That's the question that I'm going to ask you to ask yourselves. So when you think about your caregiving role, why does this matter to you? Why have you chosen to do this care? What is that about for you? What is it that anchors you? I'm doing this. Why? Is it because I love this person? Is it because some grandparent took care of you when you were a child and that inspired you and you knew that in my life I want to be able to offer care? What is it? Why are you really here? And that is also often and usually different for each one of us, but very worth reflecting on. And what I'd like you to do right now is to think about the person that you're caring for, whether you're a professional caregiver or a family caregiver, but someone that you're caring for. If you're a professional caregiver, maybe pick one, or pick the realm of the kinds of people that you care for. And then consider, why am I doing this kind of care? Why? Why do I want to do it? Why does it matter to me? Why am I really here? So if you could for a moment, just kind of sink into yourselves. I'll be quiet in a moment, but I'd like you to just think back, reflect, and consider in the case that you're bringing to mind. What really motivates me? What underlies the everyday things that I'm doing? And there probably are many of them. Why am I really here? And if you would, please, if your eyes were closed, if you could open them now, and if you could make a note, if you have a pencil and paper somewhere within grabbing distance, could you make a note of whatever has come to mind for you? And if it means that you need to condense it, maybe it's a big story in your life, can you bring it down to a word or two that will remind you, why am I really here? And please know that I don't think this is a one and done sort of a question. I would really invite you to open space, to allow this to be an open question that you come back to many times. Wasn't sure if we were going to have the capacity to do breakout rooms, but I often will ask people to explore this with a repeating question. But since we're not doing that, I'm just asking you to think about this yourself. But I really would like you to consider holding this question open and coming back to it. How come? Why am I really here? And as you think of it another time and then another, you might go a layer deeper. Maybe I'm really here because I'm the only person here to do this. But little by little, you may go deeper with why this matters to you. So this is the R of grace. And what would it take you to remember this right in the middle of being a caregiver? If you're a clinician, right in the middle of knowing all the diagnostic treatment plans you have and all the things you need to do, could you pause for a second and take a breath and just go, why am I really here? That's all. Recall it and just affirm it. So I think intuitively we all can understand the importance of this. Kind of keeps us on track, right? It helps us not to be so distracted by the everyday stuff, and there's so much of it, it's often overwhelming, that we come back to what's our real deeper purpose. We're doing the kind of care that we're giving. There's a term the psychologists like to use. Maybe some of you are psychologists, I don't know. But as I've been taught it, it's pro-social intention. So it's not just having an intention, but it's an intention for the greater good, for some kind of greater good that is beyond the everyday good. Not that there's anything wrong with the everyday good, but what is something that's for the greater good of others as well as myself? Right? And that pro-social intention is very interestingly found to be not only good for the other person that we might be doing something good for, and not only good for us emotionally, but even good for us physically. Who would have thought? Right? I found that very surprising. I'm not a scientist. I'm, as I often say, I'm not the scientist in the family. I'm the chaplain, right? But I heard a talk given by a professor down at the UCLA Med School, and he was talking about this. And he said, when we enact an intention that's for the greater good, our bodies reward us, right? Reward us with a stronger immune profile. Now, I remember thinking, that's kind of nutty. That's crazy. Why would that be the case? And I remember thinking that, and I looked at the Zoom of the guy that was giving the talk, and I thought, I think I trust this guy. He's really a cool scientist, and he's talking about genetic transcription factors and heat plots and la-di-da stuff that I certainly didn't understand. But I just thought on a common sense level, why would this even be? And when I thought about it, it made sense to me. So this works for me. You'll have to see what you think. But it's the idea that for millennia, human beings have survived by taking care of one another, right? We know that there's the mammalian caregiving system. We know there's the system where we took care of our tribe members. We're actually not built to survive the way saber-toothed tigers are built. We don't have the claws or the fangs. We may act like it sometimes. We don't really have those. But the thing that has helped us survive is affiliation. It's connecting with other people. It's doing things together. It's solving problems together. That's how we've survived. So when we take care of one another, or take care of others, or do something for the good of others, our bodies say, good job, you're doing the right thing, right? You're being a good human. This is good for all of you. Yeah. So it makes sense in that sense. I think it's also helpful to understand it while we're caregivers. I find it helps me. I'm very surprised at that, but it does. I'll remember that, oh, this is good for me. It's probably keeping me from getting a cold. I know that sounds really wonky, but I think that's sort of silly thought at times. But the fact is, it's both. And I think it's really important to balance the difficulties of caregiving, and there are many, with understanding that on some level, it's also beneficial. And that if I stay aware of it and keep that on my radar, then that can help me to be a little more balanced in the process of doing this kind of care. So recall your intention. Joan Halifax once said something that I just loved. She said, oh, by the way, it also helps keep us morally grounded. I thought, what? Hadn't thought of that. But she said, yeah, it does. It reminds you why you're really here. Keeps you on track. And I think it's very true. Right? We don't get sidetracked with other stuff. We just remember this is what matters to me, and I'm actually doing it. I'm doing it because I care. Comments or thoughts on that one? I'm watching the clock very carefully. We've got little time left, but I'd love to.
I can say something.
Please, Ben.
I think I get tremendous benefit from asking the question, why am I really here? Never mind what the answer is.
Thank you. Can you say more? Don't have to, just if you want to. It's such a good, important point.
I had words like, God wants me to lighten up. What? But those aren't, I don't even know what those words mean. But I think by asking the question, why am I here? Why am I really here? It brings, like you said, pro-social energy to
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ben. And thank you too for saying, just asking the question. And I, again, now that we've talked a little more about it, I'd love to invite everyone in this Zoom room, including myself, just to remember that's an open question. Just keep coming back to that. Keep coming back to, why am I really here? What a great idea. Yeah. So I'm going to jump into the A of Grace attunement. And that will be tricky, Red Wing. It'll be super tricky. Red Wing's giving me an idea of time, which I really appreciate, which I know I asked you to do. Thank you very much. So I'm going to go to the A of Grace, which is attunement, and spend most of the time on that before we end. And then just briefly, I'll talk about the C and the E. I think we can do that. So the A of Grace. It's this lovely concept of, can I notice? Yeah, when I used to teach this to doctors and nurses, I used to say, can I notice who's walking in the room with me? And I would say that as a joke, and they would look at me like, what? What do you mean? I can see my team. I said, no. Can you tell who's walking into the room with you, meaning who you are right now? What version of you is walking into the room right now? Good question, right? Good question. So I always tend to think, well, the chaplain, Judy, that's walking into the room, Zoom room or otherwise, is certainly her best self. However, in real life, it's helpful if I take a minute out. Doesn't have to take long. It's going to take me a few minutes to say it. You can do it really quickly. Can I do a quick scan of how I'm doing in my own body, my own emotions, and my own mind? Can I do that? And why would I even bother? The reason I want to know is that it might be wise for me to be aware of what is influencing me right now when I go into this conversation or this visit, right? Just so I can adjust for it. Might help me to realize, oh, I've got a migraine. I might not be thinking as clearly, or I might be a bit distracted because of that, right? Or maybe it's just I was up all last night. I feel fine, but I'm probably not firing on all cylinders right now. Might be good if I would remember I was up all last night. Maybe I'll just go a little more slowly, be a little more patient. And I don't have to even cognitively think all that, but it might help me to realize, oh, this is what's going on for this person in this body right now. Or if it's a typical doctor, nurse, teacher, or caregiver, Maybe it's just, I have to pee and I haven't gone for 5 hours. This is crazy, but I don't have time now. So maybe part of it's that I'm distracted by that, or I haven't eaten for, 8 hours. I don't know. But can we notice? Could be that nothing comes up with regard to your body, but something might be there. It's worth noticing. So, A of grace, let me summarize it quickly. I'm going to ask you in a minute to notice what's going on, and perhaps at a remembered time in the past, in your body, in your emotions. Again, not to change it, just to notice, how were my emotions in that particular moment? And my mind, that one gets tricky because minds are very complicated, as we all know. But I'm going to ask you to think about your narratives about the situation or the person that you're about to talk to. Okay. So I'll quickly mention a little bit more about the emotions and about the narratives, and then I'm going to switch to the second half of attunement, which is, how do I think the other person's doing in their bodies and their emotions and their stories, knowing full well I can't be inside of them. I don't really know. So I need to bring a lot of humility and respect to that, and not assume that I know what the other person has going on. And yet, we all have this, we have something we are hardwired for, unless we're disabled in this way. We have empathy within us, maybe larger, maybe smaller. Yes, it's been found to be trainable, but we have this thing called empathy. We have a sense of how someone else is doing, and we have information. If we're a clinician, we've got a whole chart of information. If we're a family member, we've known someone for 40 years. We may not see things because we've known someone for 40 years, or we may be very aware. My person they have back pain. Forgot about that. They were just sitting there like nothing's wrong. Maybe they're experiencing pain. Anyway, we'll come back to that in a moment. So for yourselves, I want you to notice what's in your own body, and for your own emotions, not talking about going into analysis, just being able to say, oh, right now I'm worried about my brother because I know he's having surgery today. So I'm going in to see this person. I'm a little bit distracted because I'm worried. That's all. So that I can be aware of it. And with the stories, what might the stories be? Isn't that a good one? Let's use my brother for the example again. Oh, it's my brother. We just had an argument yesterday. Oh, I can't wait to talk with him. He's going to be so annoyed with me, right? That happens, right? And the same thing with one of our family members we're taking care of. Oh, great. It's my husband. He really loves me. He also thinks I'm a really bossy, rotten person that tells him what to do all the time. It doesn't always feel that way. But sometimes that's his story. Sometimes that's my story about what his story is. So I just conflated two things. I apologize. That was his story. Let me go in with one of my stories. So my story about someone might be, I'm going to make one up for the hospital. Let's say I'm seeing a patient in the hospital, and the person reminds me of my nephew, Matthew. So I immediately see this person has a lot of difficult things happening with them physically, and they remind me of my nephew. And somewhere inside me, I'm expecting they're going to kind of be a little bit like, where I have a certain sympathy or empathy toward that person because of that, or an aversion towards someone who reminds me of someone. But there are all kinds of reasons we have stories about other people. A lot of times psychologists like to talk about transference and countertransference, if that's part of your training. This is not going into that anywhere near that deeply, but it's certainly bringing some awareness as best we can as lay people, for those of us that are lay people, to, can I notice what my stories are about someone? And then can I shift as I start to talk with them and just briefly consider what might be going on in their bodies as best I know it. I can always ask them, Or if I'm a clinician, I can look at their chart. Doesn't mean that I know what's happening right this second, right? I can consider what their emotions might be right now. They might be here to visit with me, or I might be there to visit with them, but they might be really scared about a scan they're going to get later. They might be really angry about a treatment that they were just given or denied. Who knows? And the third one, then I get back to that one. I jumped ahead of myself before. What about their stories about the situation, or perhaps about me? Do I remind them of someone? Or do they have stories about how difficult something was yesterday and then they were scared about today? So big territory. And I took a rousing 5 minutes to talk about it. What I'd like you to do is just to be aware of this. And then, if you like, to try it out a little bit on your own. And when you try it out, my recommendation would be try out one thing. You don't need to try all this out at once. Dip your toe in the water, see how it feels. Do you get it? Is it helpful to notice these things? Does it help you be a little more clear-minded in the middle of what you're doing and giving care? Is that useful? Does that help ground you? So I'd like you to see if you can decide for yourself what works for you. So I'm going to ask you to walk through those with me, but before I do, I want to go over the C and the E of grace very quickly, which means I'm going to just barely be mentioning them a little bit. Okay.
Can I just make one quick comment? That because it seems like something came up recently in conversations around using the A, this idea of checking our own stories in the context of what it means to be an anti-racist, and to check our own stories about who the person is that we're going to see in relation to race, culture, gender, what might come up for us, what might come up for them with us walking into the room. And to me, that was such a useful way to think of using those stories for our own growth.
And that's always a part of it, isn't it? Because you're looking at someone and then you're going, what stories am I bringing to this interaction and this relationship? And it's so interesting, Red Wing, to take that into this whole area of implicit bias, because a lot of these things are often so subtle, nuanced, and partially hidden or fully hidden. So just even raising the question and opening that as part of the conversation is great. So thank you for bringing that up. So I'm going to move ahead because I'm just worried about the 10 minutes that you told me I've left, or 7, something like that. So and not because I feel like I want to rush this stuff. I would love to take lots of time with you, but I think it's a great way to at least give you a touch of what this is about. So the Sea of Grace, isn't it funny? It sounds like SEA. I had someone in one of my classes say they thought I was talking about the ocean or the Sea of Grace, which seems quite sweet. But the letter C of grace stands for consider what would really serve. Isn't that interesting? It's another good question. I would say this to you, Ben, because you appreciated the other question. I appreciate this question as well. Consider what will really serve. How often in our caregiving are we pretty darn sure that we know exactly what the next thing to do? Sorry, I'm not getting my words out right. That we know what would be best. Right. I know right now what needs to happen. I know as a caregiver, I need to help this person do this or do that. And this is a good thing. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having an idea in advance about what needs to happen. However, it can sometimes obscure really looking openly at what might really serve in this moment, which may be a little different than what we were thinking. So, if at the beginning of a visit with someone, right, whether it's somebody that lives in the same house with you or somebody that you're going to see, what would happen if you grounded yourself first and then you recalled your intention and then you checked in with attunement? How am I doing? And then you start to talk with somebody and you kind of try to suss out a little bit, how are they doing in body, heart, and narratives, right? Heart is my shorthand for emotions. Then here you are at the Sea of Grace. So before you dive in and say, okay, I'm here, let's start doing something, instead of that, what would happen if you just took a breath and said, given all this information, this additional information that I've just taken in by going through the attunement process, or as one of my colleagues likes to say, now that we've got all these extra data points, right? And that's doctor speak, I'm told. So now we've got all these extra data points for what's going on in the room. Now, what do I think would really serve? It may be exactly what I was going to do anyway. It may not be anything different whatsoever. Or it may be. It may be that you've gone through this process and realized that your person is in trouble right now. You hadn't expected that. They're looking really sad. Something's really, really hurting them in some way. Don't know what it is, but you get that sense. So maybe the next thing to do is not what you had thought. Maybe what would really serve is just sitting down, saying, hey, what's happening? I don't know what it would be. It's really nice to allow yourself the space, though, right? To see if anything comes up for you. If it doesn't, that's fine. But it'd be such a shame to miss it if there was something there that you wish you'd realized. So that sea of grace, that consider what will really serve, I consider the considering to be like super important. It's a good important. That's the sea of grace. I'm going to jump to the E in 3 minutes. Then we'll have time for questions and conversation. So the E of grace, Joan Halifax liked to say, oh, I had lots of E's, and she lists off about 7 or 8 of them, which is great and lots of fun, but she landed on 2, and the 2 of them were engage and end. And the engage is once you consider what will really serve, then you engage in whatever way makes sense at that point. And then the end is how do you end a conversation or an encounter or a visit with the person in a way that's kind, in a way that doesn't shock them with the fact that we're done, I'm going to go do something else now. How would you do that in some sort of a skillful way? And there's no right answer to that, but I think it's well worth considering. And I saw a wonderful role play of this by one of my friends and colleagues who was in the role play. He was role playing the E of grace, the end part of it. And he was going to pretend that he was a palliative care oncologist, which worked out pretty well because turns out he is a palliative care oncologist. But anyway, that's the role he was playing. And then he was playing the role with a nurse who was, she was role playing a patient with pancreatic cancer. And she thankfully does not have pancreatic cancer. She's a nurse, ethicist, wonderful person. And the 2 of them were doing role play. And they were role playing the end of a visit where they had been talking about her treatments. And this was a fairly new diagnosis for her. So here's how he chose to role play the end of this visit. He said, Mrs. Jones, I know we've been talking about a lot of stuff that's really hard just now. He said, before I have to go, is there anything else you'd like me to know? That's it. Not complicated, right? He's let her know in advance that he's going to be leaving. And I would add to that, I would say, I would maybe preface it by, we'll see each other tomorrow, but before I have to go, something that lets the person know when they're going to connect with you again, or maybe we're going to have supper together in an hour, but something that lets them know you're not just walking out of the room and leaving them alone. And for some people, if they're really impaired in a lot of ways, it can be kind of scary to have they may want the caregiver to leave, but they don't want them to leave because then they're all by themselves and they maybe can't do for themselves. So it really can mean a lot. And in the case of a physician or a nurse, it might be, don't abandon me. There's that scariness that I'm going to be left. I know they're coming back sometime, but I don't know when. So it's nice to maybe fold in when you'll see the person again. But letting them know a little in advance that you're going to leave rather than looking at your watch that, oh my gosh, it's 4:00. I'm so sorry, I have to go. That's very different, right? It's like before I have to go, you should give them a little getting used to that and giving them a little time to say something more. I love that. I've loved that ever since I first heard it. Lots of ways of doing it, but that's one way. And then the part that most of us leave this out. How about ending the visit with ourselves after we leave the room? Anybody do that? Nobody? Anybody? So this is the idea that I walk out of the room. Do I ever stop to think, oh, how'd that go? Probably not. But if we do, it might be, whoa, that was terrible. That means really went bad. So I did everything I could. I tried to ground myself. I tried to remember my pro-social, not I tried, I remember my pro-social intention. I tuned myself. It still went south on me. There's nothing I could do about it. Let me start this off by saying, sometimes that's true. We can't always change the way difficult things go forward. And we can't make someone else be another way than how they feel, right? But a lot of times our grounding, our recalling our intention, it sort of changes the dynamic in the room, and it can help to make it a smoother interaction. And when we say, how did it go? Maybe everything went well, but one little thing, and we want to remember it because then we can grow from it. Or maybe we forgot to do something we wish we had done. In that case, it's so helpful to stop and think, oh, I think next time I'm going to do that part of the care this way. What can I learn from it? How can I grow from this? Very different than beating ourselves up. It's very different than my saying, oh, Judy, you're such a jerk, right? Maybe I was a jerk. But the fact is, if I'm noticing what I can learn from it, then it turns out to be something that helps me be a better caregiver going forward. And it also helps me put it down instead of carrying it around with me for the next 12 hours, right? Which usually isn't very useful. Yeah. So, my dears, this was a lot to give you at once. I would normally want to walk you through it so you could imagine doing it on your own, but I think the timing is such, if I understand Red Wing, that you want to open it to questions now. Let me share with you, if you ever feel like doing the GRACE training, taking the full, it's not very long, it's just a long weekend, which is quite nice. You used to have to go to Santa Fe for it. You can do it online now, which is quite nice, but it's live online. I don't know if they'll start doing recorded online, but currently it's live online at usually around the end of February, beginning of March, on the Upaya website, UPAYA, if that's of interest to you. Yeah. So, yeah, comments, questions from anyone? And thank you for letting me talk at you so much so quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Judy. It's really helpful to hear you describe the different elements, in your own way, and just some really helpful nuggets there.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just did Joan's Being with Dying program, so some of this is fresh. Oh, you were there, yeah. But yeah, it's very powerful tools. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Surprising, isn't it? Because it sounds simple.
Yeah, there's just some nuggets that I've taken with me, and there was one thing Joan said about, not having expectations, and may I offer my care and presence, even if it's met with anger, anguish, sorrow, or indifference, or something that I've just kept with me, and it's so helpful. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I guess I'm just also curious to hear from people like, what nugget will you take away with you from listening to this tonight?
Well, I just want to follow on Thea, that I really thank you for just describing it in a very thoughtful and applied kind of way. I'm particularly trying to translate all these elements into my visiting patients is now on the telephone. So I don't have a lot of cues to work on. And so translating the intention of each of those elements and how I can do that over the telephone. Yeah. But thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Janet. And you're reminding me, when I first taught an introduction like this, rather short one, to a number of clinicians at the Memory and Aging Center here at UCSF. There were people that worked with people with frontotemporal dementias, and some of them were on the phone. They were study coordinators, and they met with patients and caregivers on the phone. And I hadn't realized it at first, and they were going to tack up the little sequence of what they were and work with it on the phone, but they felt like it would help them not get super distressed in the middle of the work that they were doing, which was difficult because people would get upset and angry on the phone.
Yeah.
It may not be. Thanks.
I also love your question. Can I notice who's really walking into the room about yourself? What hat am I wearing today? What version of me is happening right now? That's really helpful. I'm going to use that one.
Anyone else, or if not, what you'll
that we can also ask our clinicians, like, what part of you is showing up here today? You know, Mary Jane, who is the woman who our center is named after, was kind of famous for asking her clinicians, like, what's going on with you today? Like, how is she going to respond to who that person was across the desk who supposedly had authority, but she knew they didn't have authority over her.
Just an observation that, each of us individually, I know for myself, as you're going through these, some of the elements just feel so intuitive to me. They feel like something that I have a natural affinity for and probably do to some extent, just intuitively. And then there are others that you brought up that, are really helpful to have, like the question, what is my intent? Why am I here? Yeah. What am I doing here? That doesn't necessarily come up for me as organically as some of the attunement or ending elements do. So it's thank you. And I guess my observation is that probably for each of us, different pieces of this are more revelatory and others are more intuitive.
Yeah. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you so much. I think you're quite right. I've also found over time that I'm constantly learning from this practice, which kind of surprised me. I mean, it doesn't take that long to figure out what these 5 words are, but it's a practice. Yeah. Thank you.
Other comments, questions, takeaways from tonight?
I'll say something else as long as no one else. Right now, I'm not caring for anyone in the traditional sense. I don't have anyone dying, thank God, at the moment. But I do other kinds of work where this is very appropriate. I hold elderhood circles on Zoom for people to get through this last year, talking about aging and death and dying. And so, this has great application outside of the more traditional caregiver scenario. I can see how this would be useful for me, just starting a group every time.
It's great. Thank you. Yeah. Any challenges in messing around with this stuff, but any stuff that didn't work for you or was difficult for you? Anyone? Ah, how nice. Hi,
there you
Joan.
are, Joan.
Hi, I just want to say that I am having a great deal of difficulty grounding myself, and this was very valuable for me personally. So thank you.
So glad. Thank you. Yeah. It's surprising how useful it is to have some of this kind of practice to be able to just turn to whenever we want. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Any other last comments, questions, parting words of wisdom?
Thank you, Judy. I loved it. It was wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Ben. So good
Thanks
to
very
have you
much.
here. You're welcome. Thank you. And Kathleen, did you have something?
Yeah, this is very helpful. It's all stuff, as many of you have said, it's familiar and a lot of it's intuitive. But my reflection about my own process, I'm always driven by a sort of a call to action. And as much as I do grounding practices and know how important it is, when I'm in the mix of it all, I feel like it's this leaning out that is sort of difficult to resist and difficult to not be in that driven mode. And so this is a great tool that's very concrete, and the letters in one's pocket, and just the concept and the importance of coming back again, grounding, coming back again to why am I really doing this? What's really matters here?
Yeah.
And, I was reflecting on being with a very close friend who died about 15 months ago, and I was there every day for a long time, and I did intuitively come back to, why am I doing this? Oh, right. Now, of course, I know why. It was great to find more words for that tonight. I wrote a little about that. So thank you so much. It was really wonderful format.
Yeah. Thank you, Kathleen. I'm always amazed with that. Why am I really here? It's not that we don't know that, right? I think we all know that on some level. It's just that we get busy. Yeah. I'm glad this was helpful.
I kind of understood everything, but here in New York, we don't have any of that kind of mindfulness. We don't have time for that. Judy, that was very nice. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, someone that lived in New York for a year. I'm not a New Yorker. Yeah, that's appreciate that. It wasn't this model though is very much intended for in the middle of life. It's not intended for go sit on a meditation cushion somewhere. It's what can you do while you're in the middle of things, in the thick of it, as they say. Yeah.
We know you gather your intention on the subway, Neil.
It's always where I get it. Always.
Oh, the subways.
Well, Judy, go ahead.
What was that?
A pleasure.
Thank you.
To hear everyone and to see and listen. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's late for you too.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Judy. Thank you so much for being here with this amazing circle that's a slightly different circle each month.